Perfect. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for those who are joining us today. We are doing a little bit of a different format than usual, and I'll just kind of kick everything off and do some introductions. My name is Kirsty McPherson. I am the Marketing Director for Golden Shovel Agency, and I am pleased to host the Looking to 2020. This is a different format. We are actually bringing in both John Marshall, the president of Golden Shovel, and Aaron Brossoit, the CEO, and we're going to be having a conversation, kind of more of a talk show type of setting around looking to 2020, the economic development trends and tactics that we saw this year and then are looking forward to next year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce John. John, do you want to say a quick hello? I think John's unmuted. Aaron, do you want to go ahead and give a quick introduction on yourself, and we'll bring back over to John momentarily.
Yep, for sure. Just happy to be here. Thanks for hosting this, Kirsty. I'm looking forward to the different format and answering all of the questions today. So thanks for having me.
Perfect. And John, do you want to say a quick hello? Looks like, John, we might be having a little bit of an audio issue with you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on real quick. Aaron, we'll go ahead and get started with you while we're working out some audio issues, but will you just kind of give a little conversation around what was some of the most notable trends in economic development marketing over 2019? There was a lot that happened, obviously. We have a whole year to show for that. So what are some of the highlights that you really enjoyed seeing in the marketing space for economic development, and give a little bit of a recap?
Sure, yeah, you bet. There was a lot happening in 2019 with Golden Shovel and the economic development industry as a whole. I'm sure John will be able to get in here soon, but I will touch on a couple of things.
I'm here, if you can hear me now.
Perfect.
Oh, yep.
Wonderful.
You sound a lot better.
Been not muted?
With volume. Yeah, one of the big focuses this year, we saw quite a few trends just with our own company. There was still a large focus on story. We wrote hundreds and hundreds of articles for economic development organizations all across the country this year, and almost all of those revolved around telling the stories of the communities, and particularly the stories of the people and the businesses that were really thriving in those communities. That has become the marketing as a whole. I would say that 90% of the articles that we're putting out are stories about either people living there that are the type of talent that they're looking to attract, or businesses that are really thriving. And then beyond that, beyond just making the stories themselves, the whole aspect of economic development marketing is becoming much more sophisticated. I believe we're seeing a lot of that in 2019, not just in the business attraction side, where it's definitely become more sophisticated and more targeted. We're able to get people and get the articles and the stories that we want directly in front of the right people that are making the decisions, and not just that, but then following them all the way back to the website. And there's so many tools that are now available for keeping track of what they're interested in, how often they're visiting, and tools for nurturing those into formidable leads. How about you, John?
On my side, the trend that I thought was most notable that I saw was there's beginning to be a lot more focus on actual results or return on investment for the marketing dollars that are being spent. So some of the more traditional methods that have been utilized in the past, such as, buying a print ad in a magazine, or attending a trade show, or going on a trade mission. Those are typically big budget line items that in the past people have just kind of checked the box and done them. And those are being scrutinized more heavily by boards and funders and stakeholders. And also along the lines of a lot of the things that we focus on, whether it be a digital marketing campaign, paid media buys, things like that. There's a lot more questions being asked about, well, what am I going to get, and how can I show this or justify it to my stakeholders that it's going to be a good use of our dollars.
And John, to that note, will you kind of talk about, John and Aaron both, will you kind of talk about what some of those data trends look like this year on how many kind of users were doing things more, and some of those high level points as well? And I'm happy to kind of chime in and speak to some of this as well, but give some of the high level, what were some of the really awesome data points that we saw at this year?
Well, I think some of the things that we're starting to see, there's so many, like Aaron had said before, there's so many analytic tools available now to track, visitors to a website or to a social media campaign, or, a number of other things that we work in. And you can really see that the numbers are trending upward, and that people are becoming more engaged, specifically in the digital space. And, some projects were even won or partially won based on more of a digital campaign, rather than, what I would call the more traditional blocking and tackling of, like I said, paid ads or trade shows and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the numbers that I really like saying is that we had one digital marketing campaign that we were running. The amount of impressions were running in about the several 100,000 mark. And then the unique engagements were in the thousands. So that was really powerful numbers at the end of the year to be able to go and show the boards, just to be able to see how many people actually saw that community put in front of them, which historically speaking at trade shows, you would get a few companies in front of you. Now you're able to reach hundreds of thousands, which is super cool. Aaron, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
No, I just support all of that. And also, there's been like I mentioned, social media. All of 2019, there's just a really heavy focus on it. We found LinkedIn to be a much more valuable tool as the audience of it has been growing and the usage of it has been growing, particularly around business attraction. One of the other, I'd say, notable trends from 2019 was the marketing of opportunity zones. I'd have to say that before that, we did, it's a newer program, but we found a lot of interest and a lot of focus on getting the opportunity zone program up and running, and getting the marketing strategies made around those, and getting them into getting the word out about them so that people can take advantage of those programs while the timer's still going.
Yeah, it was almost like the space was just dominated about opportunity zone information. I know that almost all of my Google alerts always have an article about opportunity zone. So it's going to be interesting to see how that feeds over into 2020. Well, speaking of that, so kind of talking about site selection, what are some areas that economic developers need to work on for their marketing to be able to have their community more noticeable? What did you see in 2019 that worked? What didn't work specifically? And then what are you expecting over into 2020? John, do you want to go first?
Sure. There's continues to be a heavier and heavier expectation around your workforce availability, or a plan to have workforce trained up and ready to go. And that trend is going to continue. That's the biggest competitive advantage a community can have is a story around that, and details on training programs, on college curriculum, on all kinds of things like that a company or site selector is going to want to know about. Not just, hey, we have bodies, but here's their qualifications, or here's our plan to get them up and running. So that's going to be very important for communities to continue to focus on and pour resources into, and then to develop a storyline around that to market out to the site selection community and corporate executives.
Yeah, perfect. Aaron, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, and I would like to reference something that Dean Barber had shared with me earlier in the year. He's a notable site consultant. And he was mentioning that, everybody has websites right now. They're putting information, you want to have that right information online. But today it's a little bit more than just putting the links online to link to the different school programs or link to the different training programs or link to some of the different assets in the community. There needs to be another level of application from the economic developer side to connect those dots together into a story. Don't make the site consultant do the work of clicking on links and going to, let's say, a university and reading up on whatever program they put in there from their perspective, which may be recruiting students. However, from the economic development side, that training program plays a different part of the story that the school might not capture. And being able to put that into and put that explanation and have that first impression and all of that story provided on the actual economic development website, so that the consultants and the businesses from the outside looking in can put the whole story together without having to do all the hard work on their own.
Yeah, perfect. Site selection is always one of those really difficult conversations because there's so many individuals that have various different contributions in this space. And I know it's the number one area that communities really talk about trying to have a bigger relationship with. And so one of the trends that I definitely saw was more of that one-on-one relationship building as opposed to that kind of broad space. But it was introduced originally by technology. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more around the VR side, but I think that's a really, really kind of important kind of aspect as well, is that the technology is really what's building that personal connection a little bit more.
Well, there's one other tidbit I'd speak to as far as what not to do when you're trying to market your community site selectors. There was a community that landed a data center, and I'm not going to name the community, but they just recently landed a data center in the Midwest, and their chief economic developer was quoted in the local paper as saying, "We don't have the qualified workforce to go after a 100-employee company, so that's why we have to go after data centers."
Oh.
So that's an example of something you should not do to tell your story around workforce, because it's not productive in any shape or form.
Yeah. When it comes in terms of data can always tell the story that you want it to say, which I know sounds a little bit conniving in a variety of ways. But I mean, that's just how historically we've always done everything since the dawn of time, is that we can make the data say kind of what we want to. It might not necessarily be positive, but we can spin it some sort of way that makes sense without saying that we don't have workers.
Right.
Another kind of, and this is more of a client story, but another thing that we saw was definitely more studies around workforce and how to actually prove these numbers, and being able to show the labor force and the labor shed, and then also the labor pipeline that was coming in. So there was a lot of research and studies done with local high schools and community colleges, as well as universities, to be able to show how many people are planning on staying, what does the timeline look of that. And the cool thing about these types of programs is that it's not going to be just in that space. It's going to be in that 1 year. It's going to be a trend that we continue to see, so they can have good data markers over the next 5 to 10 years. And so that's specific client information that, we've also been a part of at Golden Shovel, is being able to help with these strategies together. Wonderful. All right. So looking to 2020, I feel like everybody should have their crystal ball out. But what is the largest expectation around the use of technology for marketing in 2020 that you would say? Aaron, I'm going to go ahead and let you start with this one.
Sure. Yeah. Great question. I mean, looking ahead, one thing is for sure, that this online data is becoming more important than ever. John had mentioned a little earlier that there's a big shift happening with how people are using their marketing dollars, and they're particularly focusing in on strategies that they can prove the return on investment for, so they can validate those dollars more. And the one way to really set yourself ahead is having access to the online data and being able to make sense of it. I was thinking about a presentation that I gave at IADC with Chris Knight from WavTech, and he was showing, he was talking about foreign direct investment and how, like in the United States, for example, we tend to focus really heavily on very certain countries, like getting over to China or getting over to Japan, or just working out of Germany, where there's pretty big, in a way, they're just countries that are heavily marketing to us. But he was able to take the data where WavTech tracks all foreign direct investment and all the deals that are done around the world, and could show that in some cases, depending on what your target industry is, that you don't have to focus on just Germany. You could focus on tier 2 and tier 3 cities that other countries just aren't focusing on. Even though there might be thousands of businesses, literally there were in some cases thousands of businesses that were looking to move and expand internationally. And so by picking and choosing areas to target, using that kind of big data can really make your marketing dollars far more effective and get you out of the dead competitive heat with every other community in the country.
Interesting. Perfect. John, what about some of the stuff that you're expecting?
I would just reiterate my earlier comments around you need to be embracing these new technologies that are coming online quite rapidly. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, these online tracking software and different things that we're employing with our clients. That's just going to become more and more important to justify. People are they're getting a lot more scrutiny on the performance that than I've seen in the past. There's a lot more accountability to what people's actions are doing. And so people just need to make sure that they're embracing this new technology curve to stay ahead of it. Typically, economic development has kind of lagged behind embracing technology. And the best example I'd give of that is when our company was started 10 years ago, not everybody had websites for their economic development organizations. Well, the private sector, everybody had websites for probably a decade prior to that. And so we just, as practitioners, need to get more aggressive about looking at these new trends and staying ahead of the curve.
Yeah. So you brought up a good, and I'm just curious as to what both of your thoughts are, is what do you think the new version of a website is? What is something that everybody's going to have that maybe example like that? What do you think the new website is going to be? This is like a test.
Sure, I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is I think it's just going to get a lot smarter. It's going to be able to answer more of the questions that businesses and people looking from the outside in that are traditionally require a phone call right now or a report being put together. So these tools are allowing for a lot of that information to be gathered, which is good because since so much of the industry is done anonymously, you don't necessarily know what businesses are looking at your site when they're gathering that information. And so the more information you can provide, the better. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. And the tools John's speaking of, there's going to be just a lot more sophistication. These tools are becoming, or the websites in general are becoming a lot more than our brochure. They're truly nurturing business leads. And that's come a long way over the last 10 to 15 years.
Wonderful. Okay, so in terms of some of that stuff, but what do you think the VR space will change? What does that look like? What are some of the new tools that VR is coming out with this next year? And how does that change the landscape of economic development?
Sure, I could start with this one. Well, we're now 2 years into pioneering virtual reality in the economic development field, and already in 2 years, it's been absolutely stunning growth in hardware technology, in software technology, and even in the capabilities that we've been able to do. I see in 2020, first of all, on the hardware side, we're going to find that the tools are going to be easier and easier to work with. A good example of that is the Oculus Quest headset just came out, and they've just put out hand tracking, for example, where you don't need to use a controller. It can just see your hands. Those types of innovations are just going to make the equipment easier to use and will allow for quicker adoption. Beyond that, though, I think we're going to see a much larger adoption in the economic development industry in 2020 of VR. I believe it's got a natural fit in the economic development toolkit, and that's being validated all across the industry. So we'll see a lot more of that. And there's going to be things, even in 2019, we've started really finding ways to advance the visualizations in ways that are useful for economic development. A good example of that would be Lisa Hurley down in York County, Nebraska. We were able to take an entire virtual distribution center built by an engineering firm and place it right onto a 30-plus acre industrial lot, so that when she brings virtual reality over to a site consultant, they can literally see the vision as if they were standing there of that property coming out of the ground, which is really, really powerful. And I think beyond just being able to show potential sites, what they might look like, there'll be all sorts of data visualizations that we're going to be able to do in virtual reality that wouldn't have been able to be possible just on 2 dimensions. And then lastly, with our own work, there's going to be acceleration in the ability to have virtual meeting rooms. And Golden Shovel's flights, a lot of time saved by people able to have virtual meetings through the headsets to be able to show off their properties, and particularly with rural communities and internationally.
Excellent. John, anything you would like to add here?
Well, he took all of it for himself.
I know. I'm trying to think of other things that I could add to this, and I was like, well, there goes that one.
I'd say of the people in our company that know about changing VR trends, it would be our CEO. So I'm not even going to try and compete.
Yeah. Aaron, I do know some of the different things. You did go to the Oculus conference this year. Oculus goggles are changing. All of that, just the tools used to experience VR is changing. And I'm fascinated by that, and I'm assuming there's other people who are fascinated by that as well. So do you want to talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, you bet. I was able to attend the Oculus 6 Connect conference out here in San Jose, and they talked about the different types of things that are coming out over the next year. That's where I learned about things like the hand tracking, which is very exciting. But the technology is becoming more and more natural to use. Before, I mean, even just a year and a half ago, in order to use a VR headset, you had to have it plugged into a pretty powerful computer. And today, these technologies are completely wireless. The Oculus Quest, which came out as the first two-handed wireless system, has blown the field wide open. I remember Oculus saying that of the $100 million they've sold in their VR app store, 20% of that was due to the Oculus Quest coming out, and all in the last 4 months, whereas that 100 million came in over 6 years. So it gives you an idea of how that's ramping up. And even from our own, we were actually just looking for a couple sets of the Oculus Quest, and they're completely sold out across the country right now, which I think is a good sign of the continued adoption of virtual reality by the masses.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, I'm excited about that, just as far as just some of the different things that are happening in the actual technology space of VR in general, and how that's going to impact things. Because it really is a complete difference, and it's a huge game changer for not only just leisure activities, which I think historically people have thought more of VR as being things around leisure activities, and now it's a really cool business tool, and a really unique economic development tool. And so I think that that's going to be something really interesting to continue to watch in 2020.
Yeah, John, I noticed on LinkedIn you made a post yesterday regarding a story about a gentleman up in Ohio that had shown it to some site selectors.
Yeah, I was just talking to one of our, not even a client at this point, just researching the power of virtual reality, and he had taken a couple sets of our goggles around to some of these different site selector events that he attends throughout the year. And when we were kind of doing a debrief on that, he had mentioned to me, he said, I've spoken to 20 site selection consultants over the last 6 months and had them demo this technology and asked them if it would be a worthwhile investment for my regional group to do. And 18 of the 20 said, absolutely, that's valuable to me, do it. And one of the two that didn't say that got dizzy, which happens from time to time, sporadically. And then the last one said, no, I like to visit the communities in person. However, I think this would be phenomenal for foreign direct investment attraction. So basically 95% of the site selection consultants endorsed it as a worthwhile investment and endeavor. And so I think that's really going to be the trend now, is it's being embraced by not only economic developers, but also site selection consultants. And it's going to be, within a few years, my prediction would be it's going to be as important as having an economic development website.
9 out of 10 dentists recommend kind of thing.
Right.
9 out of 10 site selectors, and really 9.5, 9.95%.
Right. Well, I feel like that's a pretty ringing endorsement for where we're headed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I can tell you, a year ago or a year and a half ago, when we were demoing this to the same community, we were getting probably about a 50% endorsement rate. And so I know it was featured at the Site Selector Guild conference. It was on the main stage as a topic just this past spring. So it's starting to evolve, and it's going to pick up quite a head of steam here moving forward.
Wonderful. So what do you think is the number one thing a community should invest in to make themselves more attractive to investors in 2020? There's a lot of investment happening on this question.
One of the thoughts I have for 2020 is that I believe there's a large need for updating the marketing strategies that some of the communities may already have that need to be refined, or ones that don't have them need to focus in early to take advantage of these new technologies that are available. The new techniques, whether it's HubSpot, whether it's the lead forensics, or whether it's just writing the success stories and choosing the targets that they're going to go after, they just require another level of refinement on that strategy. One of the things that's happening that I believe others may have seen is there's been a big stray from things like banner ads. The marketing of the day is content, it's stories, and it is getting more and more specialized and customized to the individual person that it's being made for. The only content these days that's doing its job and effectively marketing is one that brings value to people. And the more the content is written in a blanket fashion, the less value it brings to an individual person. And so the adoption of these new tools also requires the ability to customize the content further to reach the problems that the people are looking to solve, promote it.
And I'd dovetail off of that. I agree with that wholeheartedly, that you better have a unique story that's very focused on a certain target industry or a certain target demographic, if it's around workforce or whatever the case may be. But along with that, you better have a product to sell. So the question is, what does a community need to do? Number one, to be attractive to an investor, you better have something for them to invest in. So if you're going to tell the story, there better be a product at the end of it. It better be an available building that's ready to go. It better be greenfield space that's site certified. It better be brownfield with, a redevelopment plan attached to it. Don't, tell a story and then not have something to back it up with, because then you'll lose credibility and you'll lose your audience and you won't get any investment. So if it's not unique, and again, I'd cite Dean Barber on this. He just posted a blog where he said, if I read one more, tagline around the lines of, this is a wonderful place to live, work, and play. Well, there's 1,000 communities that have that. So that's not going to resonate with anyone. That's just mind numbing. So develop your story and develop your product. So I would say it's a two-pronged approach. And that's what we're seeing with this opportunity zone marketing, is that there's opportunity zones all across the country, but most of them don't have a product to sell. And so if they don't spend some time developing that, this tax incentive is going to walk right by them and they're not going to be able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
Yeah,
No,
it's almost like live, work, and play for whom. Answering that question to the next level and choosing your audience. There's an awful lot of trying to get anybody and the feeling like, oh, this is a great community for anybody. And not only is that not true, but it's the act of choosing who are the people we're going to go after. That's where the real business of economic development begins.
It's always kind of funny because I've said this at a couple different conferences and a couple different talks. And I think it's been since used in a few other places. But I coined this as don't suffer from chronic uniqueness. Like there's nothing, own who you are, but try not to make yourself the same, or try not to be too unique and be the same as everybody else. So try to stay away from chronic uniqueness. It's like the plague of 2020. So what else do you expect communities need to stay on top of in regard to their marketing and attraction efforts in 2020? What are some of the main things that they need to do? Stay on top of. Like anything final, any other
I would say that you definitely need to have a plan or resources in place to keep your content and your messaging fresh and consistent. And whether you got to hire an agency like Golden Shovel to do it for you, which is highly successful, or you hire internal staff or train internal staff to do it, it needs to be a big focus, because site selectors and corporate executives don't want to see news that's 6 months old on your website. And they don't want to see demographic data that's from 1985 on your website. So definitely that needs to be a focus and a priority. Whether you do it internally or you outsource it, it needs to be part of your plan.
Perfect. Stay on top of content.
Yeah.
Great one. Aaron?
I just wanted to add in, especially in 2020, is that we have to, especially the economic development field, needs to keep tabs on the trends of the changing workforce. There's a lot happening right now that is poised to disrupt jobs across the country in a significant way, whether it's self-driving vehicles, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's something that's going to come from quantum computing. All of these disruptions are coming together. They're connecting in ways that are just going to change the workforce, and not just in like replacing people's jobs and forcing the issue of having to be retrained or reskilled, but even in the changes on how people work. We're seeing so much of the workforce, I guess they would call it the gig economy, where they're now their own businesses. They work as contractors. They have control over where they live and when they work. There's also in some communities, a much more focus on just the entrepreneurial landscape and different types of job creation other than just significant business attraction or the traditional business retention and expansion. And so those trends are going to make a difference. You're trying to attract a business to your community, and you know that that industry is going to be disrupted significantly 5 years down the road here, or 10 years down the road. Knowing that and being aware of that affects the timelines of large-scale decisions like moving an operation into town.
Wonderful. Anything else here that either one of you would like to add? Perfect.
No, thanks for having us. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So just kind of a couple quick recaps. This is kind of an intro to what we're going to potentially be using as a podcast style. And so kind of a conversation talk show type of deal. We'll record this and have it posted on our website and send it out a little bit differently than usual. So I just appreciate both of you being on here, kind of talking about what happened in 2019 and what's happening in 2020. And I look forward to seeing both of you here again in 2020. In the meantime, I hope everybody has a very happy end of their year.
Great. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.